Yes, figures published this morning show that the number of people cautioned or convicted for carrying knives in England and Wales has reached a record level. More than 14,000 offences of knife possession were dealt with by the police and courts in the year to September. It's the highest number since figures were first compiled the way they are now in 2009. And the important thing is that these are not actual use of knives. These are people being arrested because they're in possession of knives or because they've used knives to threaten other people or other dangerous weapons. The actual use of a knife, all the murders we've seen in London, don't come under the knife crime category. They're done as assaults and murder. So this is simply for possession or maybe waving one around. Danny, the Prime Minister has talked about taking control of this himself to get the knife crime down. Is that a wise thing for a Prime Minister to do?
It's a tempting thing. I'm not entirely sure it is a wise thing, no, because one of the reasons is that I don't think anyone is entirely sure how this can be dealt with. Common sense, doesn't it, sort of leans towards stop and search working, but lots of data doesn't. And we do know there's a real cost to having stop and search. So the problem with taking control of it, if he knew exactly how to deal with it, and clearly it's a tipping point problem, people are carrying knives because other people are carrying it. If he knew how to drive knife crime below the tipping point, if we were all confident about it, it'd be relatively easy if it was a matter of money, if it was a matter of simply policing. But I think the problem he's got is he's not sure, and neither this panel, well, I suspect that's true, I certainly don't feel sure what methods are going to work. So he may be taking on something that he then doesn't succeed, and simply him taking it on doesn't, solve anything. It just...
He's done it in the context of the Conservative Party, traditionally associated with the party of law and order, and yet you've seen these crime figures, violent crime, which is what frightens, rightly, worries people most of all, the figures getting worse, up another 3%. And people don't like the idea that a lot of other people are walking around with large knives hidden on their body somewhere. It's a political move too. He needs to restore his party's reputation as a law and order party, particularly since he's got all these Labour votes in the north now, and they're the kind of voters who are rather keen on law and order.
Yeah, and you can see how the Conservatives have treated Labour Mayor Sadiq Khan with rising knife crime in London and tried to pin it solely on him as well. It's always been a kind of political move from the Conservatives. I think the danger is, as Danny says, is that you come up with these front pages that the Telegraph and the Daily Mail will say, sentences to rise and all these big high-profile headlines that don't really mean anything until you start tackling the root causes, and that is a lot less exciting and newsworthy, and it just takes a lot longer.
Takes a lot, and sentences have been rising. First of all, there's been custodial sentences have been rising if you found possession of a knife. It's now up to 38% if you found with that. And the average is now 8 months, up from 6 months. So they've been getting tougher, but the figures are still going up. And it's a difficult one, I would suggest, because a lot of the causes for this are issues outside the government's any government's control.
Some will be, but I suspect a lot of people who are found to be carrying knives do so because they see an escalation in attacks on people with knives. Yes. It's those that feel vulnerable, then feel they have to carry a knife. Yes. And once you're carrying a knife and you can be in possession of using it, and knife crime escalates. So I think the causes of it are actually quite complex. What I haven't looked at in the detail on the figures is to see what the age group and the profile is of those that are carrying knives. I think that might be quite a useful figure to have to look at how we tackle this. But I think Danny, as somebody said, it is quite a complex thing to do. I've been on your programme, I think this is about the third or fourth time when I've been on, and we've spoken about knife crime over the last couple of years.
Well, it's an issue that I think people are concerned about. I think a lot of parents are worried whether their kids are carrying knives as well, because they feel threatened. Priti Patel, I'm told, informed the Cabinet that on this county lines drug runs, that there could be up to 10,000 children involved in this now. I mean, it's become a serious issue. And although the Prime Minister said, I'm going to take control, which that may be the right thing to do, a dangerous thing, a risky thing, but maybe the right thing, as Danny says, we don't know what he's going to do.
We don't. I live outside the M25 in a market town, and the county lines drug stuff, it's just wall to wall in the local press. People are talking about it in the pubs and watching sporting events and in the market square all the time. It's absolutely huge. Boris Johnson's made a habit of just slightly tweaking phrases that Tony Blair made famous. So when, after the recent December election, he talked about a new dawn, Stormont power sharing, he talked about the hand of the history becoming a hand of the future. Maybe he needs to be tough on knife crime and tough on the causes of knife crime, because Danny's right, the evidence is shaky, but you're much more likely to make a success of stop and search if it comes alongside confidence-building measures, community-enhancing and boosting measures.
All of which take time.
At the same time. That's what
But
the
we've
evidence
lost a lot of
shows.
that. But we've lost a lot of that, haven't we?
We have.
The youth and community workers have been cut. We've
Absolutely.
lost Sure Start. We need to actually get back some of those youth workers and people engaging with young people in the way that we used to have. And I say Boris Johnson's one of those who sought to cut those services. Perhaps now he realised the value of them, because that will be part of the solution. Not entirely, but part of it.
The only thing you could say about taking control personally, if you absolutely really do that, in New York, what they then ended up doing was using computers and statistics and data to find where the hotspots are, because all of these things are they're driven by a small place of clusters, and if you can identify where the clusters are, you can police those more intensively, and you can drive people. Yes, so I think that if you are going to, let's take Dominic Cummings's blog post seriously, use data. If he is going to take control of it, actually take control. In other words, run a centre that works out where the hotspots are.
He's been talking about
it's not just policing.
No,
it's
it
not
isn't.
just
government
policing.
making it a cross-government issue.
Right.
But you mentioned stop and search, which of course has been controversial. Theresa May kind of stopped it. It's come back a bit. I was told last night by someone who's very close to this that the thing that has changed stop and search and now makes it less controversial are the police body cams.
That's true.
That every stop and search is now recorded. And it's had two effects. One, the police behave properly, the police do what they should be doing. And secondly, people can't make false claims of harassment. It's helped both sides.
True, and the other thing that can help with stop and search is if you target it properly. It was Malcolm Gladwell's just dealt with this in his recent book. If you target where you do these searches, you're then tackling fewer people who have nothing to do with it, you're dragging fewer people into it, and you're more effective. So I think it's about making smart stop and search, not just about reintroducing.
But you get it wrong, you just shift crime to another area. There has to be a much more fundamental change in how we deal with young people very early on.
Are changing.
They are.
Have changed. It's not the 80s
You can
anymore.
drive knife crime
Don't try and put words that I haven't said. What I'm saying,
No.
police are part of the solution, but you're not going to address this just if you look at policing it. You have to look at much more fundamental change of engaging with young people very early on.
But it's not either or, is it?
Absolutely not.
You have an immediate problem,
Besi-
which you need to deal
Yeah.
with, and you've got longer term...
That's
I'm
the
in
point.
favour of
That's the
that,
point I'm
but I'm
making,
not sure
Andrew. It's a
that-
package of measures that will do it.
You're the economist here, Liam. Again, I was told recently that one of the reasons the whole county lines thing has happened is that the global price of drugs, of illegal drugs, has collapsed. That there's a huge oversupply, and the drug dealers in the big cities can't make the same money out of their patch that they used to. The artificial drugs have collapsed in price, the crack cocaine has gone down. So they've extended their market to try and keep their revenues up by going to areas that previously were not concerned, to the kind of place that you now live. Government has no real control over that.
It doesn't, and our journalistic colleague Jason Farrell of Sky has just brought out a really interesting book on this that I'm halfway through, and I congratulate him for that. It's not just about making the market bigger by going beyond the M25. It's also about moving from the lower cost, lower margin Class B drugs to the Class A drugs, where you've got, frankly, richer kids who are a bit more naive about the price of what they're paying for. They've got a bit more access to money, and I'm afraid this is what we're seeing. And this goes right into the Tory heartlands, as well as being a problem that usually we associate with the inner city.
No, I think it's universal. I live in a coastal town. We see exactly the same things. You couldn't target one area of the country. This is a nationwide problem, and I think the solution to it will be multi-agency. It has to be quite a thoughtful solution and bringing people together, not one answer.
But if it is a tipping point problem, then policing does work. You're completely correct about the other. No, you're completely right about the other services. But it may be actually that policing is the most important part of that. because if people are taking, using the knife crime part of our discussion, if people are taking knives to protect themselves against other people with knives, then what you need to do is drive the number of knives down, and policing is the most important part of that.
The one thing the Prime Minister has done by putting himself to the forefront of this is, politicians often make promises they're going to do things, and either it's going to happen so far in the future that they won't be there, or that it's in a way that you can't really hold them to account because you can't measure it. He said he'll do something about something we can measure. We've got these figures and we can now measure them against it.
But I suppose he hasn't given a time frame for it. And
No.
Boris Johnson seems to get away with, in the way other politicians don't, saying things and making the right noises and getting away with stuff that, further down the line.
This is more about banging Big Ben, though, isn't it? This is about something of deep concern.
He's floating the general idea and seeing if the political mood on this has changed. And I believe it has changed, partly, as you say, Andrew, because of the new technology they're using, partly because, frankly, the Met and other services have come into the 21st century in terms of their
And I think you're also
attitude.
right on that, because he's also recognised that this policy of cutting police over the last 10 years has been the wrong policy. And that's why I think that your point, Danny, about wanting the police to
they've
act,
been reversing that
they're having to
too.
reverse decisions they've made
Well, it wasn't
previously.
necessarily the wrong policy because they also had to save the money.
Well, we're going
Some things are better saved than others.
Let's just set the benchmark. The Prime Minister said he's going to get to grips with this. The number of knife and other offensive weapons possessions hit 22,286. That's the latest figures. That's the benchmark. Let us see if there's an improvement or not as the months go by.